The Tibetan Book of the Dead
is mentioned in this book. Timothy Leary and Ralph Messner and Richard Alpert, The Psychedelic Experience. A tribute to W. Y. Evans Wentz. Dr. Evans Wentz, who literally sat at the feet of a Tibetan Lama for years in order to acquire his wisdom, not only displays a deeply sympathetic interest in those esoteric doctrines so characteristic of genius of the East, but likewise possesses the rare faculty of making them more or less intelligible to the layman. W. Y. Evans Wentz is a great scholar who devoted his mature years to the role of bridge and shuttle between Tibet and the West. Like an RNA molecule, activating the latter was the coded message of the former. No greater tribute could be paid to the work of this academic liberator than to base our psychedelic manual upon his insights, and to quote directly his comments on the message of this book. The message is that the art of dying is quite as important as the art of living, or of coming into birth, of which it is the complement and summation, that the future of being is dependent, perhaps entirely, upon the rightly controlled death, as the second part of this volume, setting forth the art of reincarnating, emphasizes. The art of dying, as indicated by the death rite associated with initiation into the mysteries of antiquity, and referred to by Apuleius, the Platonic philosopher himself an initiate, and by many other illustrious initiates, and as the Egyptian Book of the Dead suggests, appears to have been far better known to the ancient peoples inhabiting the Mediterranean countries than it is now by their descendants in Europe and the Americas. To those who had passed through the secret experiencing of pre-mortem death, right dying is initiation, conferring, as does the initiatory death rite, the power to control consciously the process of death and regeneration. A tribute to Carl G. Jung. Psychology is the systematic attempt to describe and explain man's behavior, both conscious and non-conscious. The scope of study is broad, covering the infinite variety of human activity and experience, and it is long tracing back through the history of the individual, through the history of his ancestors, back through the evolutionary vicissitudes and triumphs which have determined the current status of the species. Most difficult of all, the scope of psychology is complex, dealing as it does with processes which are ever changing. Little wonder that psychologists, in the face of such complexity, escape into specialization and parochial narrowness. A psychology is based on the available data and the psychologist's ability and willingness to utilize them. The behaviorism and experimentalism of 20th century Western psychology is so narrow as to be mostly trivial. Consciousness is eliminated from the field of inquiry. Social application and social meaning are largely neglected. A curious ritualism is enacted by a priesthood rapidly growing in power and numbers. Eastern psychology, by contrast, offers us a long history of detailed observation and systematization of the range of human consciousness, along with an enormous literature of practical methods for controlling and changing consciousness. Western intellectuals tend to dismiss Oriental psychology. The theories of consciousness are seen as occult and mystical. The methods of investigating consciousness change, such as meditation, yoga, monastic retreat, and sensory deprivation, are seen as alien to scientific investigation, and most damning of all, in the eyes of the European scholar, is the alleged disregard of Eastern psychologies for the practical, behavioral, and social aspects of life. Such criticism betrays limited concept and the inability to deal with the available historical data on a meaningful level. The psychologies of the East have always found practical application in the running of the state, in the running of daily life and family. A wealth of guides and handbooks exists. The Book of Tao, the Analects of Confucius, the Gita, the I Ching, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, to mention only the best known. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, or the Bardo Turtle, is a book of instructions for the dead and dying. Like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it is meant to be a guide for the dead man during the period of his bardo existence. In this quote, Jung settles for the exoteric and misses the esoteric. In a later quote, he seems to come closer. The instruction given in the Bardo Turtle serves to recall to the dead man the experiences of his initiation and the teachings of his guru, for the instruction is, at bottom, nothing less than an initiation of the dead into the Bardo life, just as the initiation of the living was a preparation for the beyond. Such was the case, at least, with all the mystery cults in ancient civilizations, from the time of the Egyptian and Eleusinian mysteries. In the initiation of the living, however, this beyond is not a world beyond death, but a reversal of the mind's intentions and outlook, a psychological beyond, or, in Christian terms, a redemption from the trammels of the world and of sin. Redemption is a separation and deliverance from an earlier condition of darkness and unconsciousness, and leads to a condition of illumination and releasedness, to victory and transcendence over everything given. Thus far, the Bardo Turtle is, as Dr. Evans Wentz also feels, an initiation process whose purpose it is to restore to the soul the divinity it lost at birth. In the summary of Lama Govinda's comments, which follow, we shall see that the Tibetan commentator, freed from the European concept of yong, moves directly to the esoteric and practical meaning of the Tibetan book. In his autobiography written in 1960, Jung commits himself wholly to the inner vision and to the wisdom and superior reality of internal perceptions. In 1938, when his Tibetan commentary was written, he was moving in this direction, but cautiously and with the ambivalent reservation of the psychiatrist cum mystic. The dead man must desperately resist the dictates of reason, as we understand it, and give up the supremacy of egohood, regarded by reason as sacrosanct. What this means in practice is complete capitulation to the objective powers of the psyche, with all that this entails, a kind of symbolical death corresponding to the judgment of the dead in the Sitpa Bardo. It means the end of all conscious, rational, morally responsible conduct of life, and a voluntary surrender to what the Bardo Tödel calls karmic illusion. The basic trusts and beliefs you must be ready to accept the possibility that there is a limitless range of awareness for which we now have no words, that awareness can expand beyond the range of your ego, yourself, your familiar identity, beyond everything you have learned, beyond your notions of space and time, beyond the differences which usually separate people from each other and from the world around them. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was called, in its own language, the Bardo Tödel, which means liberation by hearing on the after-death plane. The book stresses over and over that the free consciousness has only to hear and remember the teachings in order to be liberated. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is ostensibly a book describing the experiences to be expected at the moment of death, during an intermediate phase lasting 49 7 times 7 days, and during rebirth into another bodily frame. This, however, is merely the exoteric framework which the Tibetan Buddhists use to cloak their mystical teachings. The language and symbolism of death rituals, of Bonism, the traditional pre-Buddhist Tibetan religion, were skillfully blended with Buddhist conceptions. The esoteric meaning, as it has been interpreted in this manual, is that it is death and rebirth of the ego that is described, not of the body. Lama Govinda indicates this clearly in his introduction when he writes, "It is a book for the living as well as for the dying." The book's esoteric meaning is often concealed beneath many layers of symbolism. It was not intended for general reading. It was designed to be understood only by one who was to be initiated personally by a guru into the Buddhist mystical doctrines, into the pre-mortem death rebirth experience. These doctrines have been kept a closely guarded secret for many centuries, for fear that naive or careless application would do harm. In translating such an esoteric text, therefore, there are two steps. One, the rendering of the original text into English, and two, the practical interpretation of the text for its uses. In publishing this practical interpretation for use in the psychedelic drug session, we are, in a sense, breaking with the tradition of secrecy and thus contravening the teachings of the Lama gurus. However, the step is justified on the grounds that the manual will not be understood by anyone who has not had a consciousness expanding experience, and that there are signs that the Lamas themselves, after their recent diaspora, wish to make their teachings available to a wider public. Following the Tibetan model, then, we distinguish three phases of the psychedelic experience. Under the guise of a science of death, the Bardo todo reveals the secret of life, and therein lies its spiritual value and its universal appeal. Here then is the key to a mystery which has been passed down for over 2,500 years. The consciousness expansion experience, the pre-mortem death and rebirth rite. The Vedic sages knew the secret. The Eleusinian initiates knew it. The Tantrics knew it. In all their esoteric writings, they whisper the message. It is possible to cut beyond ego consciousness, to tune in on neurological processes which flash by at the speed of light, and to become aware of the enormous treasury of ancient racial knowledge welded into the nucleus of every cell in your body. Modern psychedelic chemicals provide a key to this forgotten realm of awareness, but just as this manual without the psychedelic awareness is nothing but an exercise in academic Tibetology, so too the potent chemical key is of little value without the guidance and the teachings. Westerners do not accept the existence of conscious processes for which they have no operational term. The attitude which is prevalent is, if you can't label it, and if it is beyond current notions of space-time and personality, then it is not open for investigation. Thus, we see the ego loss experience confused with schizophrenia. Thus we see present-day psychiatrists solemnly pronouncing the psychedelic keys as psychosis-producing and dangerous. The new visionary chemicals and the pre-mortem death rebirth experience may be pushed once again into the shadows of history. Looking back, we remember that every Middle Eastern and European administrator, with the exception of certain periods in Greece and Persia, has, during the last 3,000 years, rushed to pass laws against any emerging transcendental process. The pre-mortem death rebirth session, its adepts, and any new method of consciousness expansion. The present moment in human history, as Lama Govinda points out, is critical. Now, for the first time, we possess the means of providing the enlightenment to any prepared volunteer.
Page 8. The Tibetan Book of the Dead. In his introduction to the first edition of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Evans Wentz relates that he obtained this manuscript copy of the text early in 1919 from a young Lama of the Kargyupta sect of the Red Hat School attached to the Bhutyabasti Monastery, Darjeeling. The manuscript was in a very ragged and worn condition and, according to the young Lama, had been passed down through his family over several generations. Later that same year, Evans Wentz acquired a collection of Tibetan texts from Major W. L. Campbell, a British political officer stationed in Gangtok, the capital of Sikkim, who had purchased them while visiting Gyantse, a town in southwest Tibet. Evans Wentz took these texts to Kazi Dawa Samdup, 1868 to 1922, the English teacher at the Maharaja Boys' School in Gangtok, and the two men worked together over the next 2 months on an English translation. In his preface to the first edition, Evans Wentz describes himself as the mouthpiece of a Tibetan sage and little more than a compiler and editor of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which included his additional commentary and extensive footnotes. The text presented here is the same as that of the first edition of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, except that additional material has been confined to essential explanatory footnotes. In his preface to the second edition, Evans Wentz explains the essential message of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, saying that the art of dying is quite as important as the art of living, or of coming to birth, of which it is the complement and summation, he adds. In the Occident, i.e. the West, where the art of dying is little known and rarely practiced, there is, contrastingly, the common unwillingness to die, which, as the Bardo ritual suggests, produces unfavorable results. Chikhai Bardo first stage. The primary clear light seen at the moment of death. The clear light arises from the direct experience of one's own essential nature as the Dharma Kaya, the divine body of truth, perfect enlightenment or Buddhahood. If the deceased recognizes the clear light at the moment of death, he becomes enlightened and is thus liberated from the cycle of death and rebirth. If not, he passes on to the next stage of the Bardo. Chikhai Bardo second stage. The secondary clear light seen immediately after death. If the deceased recognizes the clear light, he is liberated. If not, he passes on to the next stage. Chönyet Bardo. Apparitions of the peaceful and wrathful deities, which are projections of the deceased's own mind. The Chunyat Bardo extends over 14 days and is divided into 2 7-day periods. During the first 7-day period, the deceased comes face to face with the 42 peaceful deities, which are said to emanate from the heart. If the deceased recognizes the peaceful deities as a reflection of his own mind, recognition and liberation are simultaneous. If the deceased does not recognize them, he enters the second 7-day period and comes face to face with the 58 wrathful deities, which are said to emanate from the brain or head. If the deceased fails to recognize these for what they are, he is compelled to wander through the next Bardo. Sitpa Bardo. The deceased's consciousness is now separated from the body, but its attachment to life is still such that it is like a body without substance, known as the mental or desire body. Driven unremittingly by the winds of karma, the deceased is compelled to wander the world, looking for somewhere to rest, but finding nowhere. The suffering brought on by this seemingly endless wandering through the Bardo leads to the deceased person's consciousness looking on rebirth in one of 6 realms, those of the gods, demigods, humans, animals, hungry spirits, or in hell, as a means of bringing its suffering to an end. The initial publication of the Tibetan Book of the Dead coincided with the resurgence of interest in spiritualism and the afterlife in the opening decades of the 20th century. The publication of this edition coincides with a similar resurgence of interest in the afterlife, due in part to the many first-hand accounts of near-death experience, NDEs, and out-of-body experiences, OBEs, reported in the Western media. Readers may have noted a similarity between the bright light reported by many who have a near-death experience and the clear light of the Chikhai Bardo. Medical scientists, too, are expressing an interest. 2008 saw the launch of a 3-year project that will gather evidence from hospitals in both the UK and USA, which is hoped will increase our understanding of NDEs and OBEs and thus shed further light on the nature of consciousness and the relationship between mind and body. However, there is a considerable difference between enlightening scientific evidence and enlightenment. The former may increase our understanding of the mind. The latter occurs when we experience for ourselves the true nature of the mind. It was to this end that the text of the Tibetan Book of the Dead was read aloud to the dying or recently deceased, so that they could attain enlightenment, and thus be liberated from the suffering associated with the endless cycle of death and rebirth. Yet we don't need to wait until the very end of our life for an opportunity to attain enlightenment. We all have within us the potential to become enlightened at any point in our life. The key lies in our recognition of the true nature of the mind. Page 13, Book 1, the Chikhai Bardo and the Juniate Bardo. Herein lies the setting face to face to the reality in the intermediate state, the great deliverance by hearing while on the after-death plane, from the profound doctrine of the emancipating of the consciousness by meditation upon the peaceful and restful deities. The Dharmakaya of thine own mind thou shalt see, and seeing that thou shalt have seen the all, the vision infinite, the round of death and birth, and the state of freedom. Milarepa. Death's messengers, all they who thoughtless are, nor heed what time death's messengers appear, must long the pangs of suffering feel, in some base body habiting. But all those good and holy men, what time they see death's messengers, behave not thoughtless, but give heed to what the noble doctrine says, and in attachment frighted see of birth and death the fertile source, and from attachment free themselves, thus birth and death extinguishing. Secure and happy once are they, released from all this fleeting show, exempted from all sin and fear, all misery have they overcome. Anguttara Nkaya. Page 15. The obeisances. To the divine body of truth, the incomprehensible, boundless light, to the divine body of perfect endowment, who are the lotus and the peaceful and the restful deities, to the lotus-born incarnation, Padmasambhava, who is the protector of all sentient beings, to the gurus, the three bodies, obeisance. The introduction. The great doctrine of liberation by hearing, which confers spiritual freedom on devotees of ordinary wit, while in the intermediate state, has three divisions: the preliminaries, the subject matter, and the conclusion. At first, the preliminaries, the guide series for emancipating beings, should be mastered by practice. The transference of the consciousness principle. By the guide, the highest intellects ought most certainly to be liberated, but should they not be liberated, then while in the intermediate state of the moments of death, they should practice the transference, which giveth automatic liberation by once merely remembering it. Devotees of ordinary wit ought most certainly to be freed thereby, but should they not be freed, then, while in the intermediate state, during the experiencing of reality, they should persevere in the listening to this great doctrine of liberation by hearing. Accordingly, the devotee should at first examine the symptoms of death as they gradually appear in his dying body, following self-liberation by observing the characteristics of the symptoms of death. Then, when all the symptoms of death are complete, he should, apply the transference, which conferreth liberation by merely remembering the process. The reading of this Tödel. If the transference has been effectually employed, there is no need to read this Tödel, but if the transference has not been effectually employed, then this Tödel is to be read correctly and distinctly near the dead body. If there be no corpse, then the bed or the seat to which the deceased had been accustomed should be occupied by the reader, who ought to expound the power of the truth. Then, summoning the spirit of the deceased, imagine it to be present there, listening, and read during the time no relative or fond mate should be allowed to weep or to wail, as such is not good for the deceased. So restrain them. If the body be present, just when the expiration has ceased, either a Lama who has been as a guru to the deceased, or a brother in the faith whom the deceased trusted, or a friend for whom the deceased has great affection, putting the lips close to the ear of the body without actually touching it, should read this great Tödel. The practical application of this Tödel by the officiant. Now for the explaining of the Tödel itself. If thou canst gather together a grand offering, offer it in worship of the Trinity. If such cannot be done, then arrange whatever can be gathered together as objects on which thou canst concentrate thy thoughts and mentally create as illimitable an offering as possible and worship. Then the path of good wishes invoking the aid of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas should be recited 7 times or thrice. After that, the path of good wishes giving protection from fear in the Bardo, and the path of good wishes for safe delivery from the dangerous pitfalls of the Bardo, together with the root words of the Bardo, are to be read distinctly and with the proper contonation. Then this great Tödel is to be read either 7 times or thrice, according to the occasion. First cometh the setting face to face to the symptoms of death, as they occur during the moments of death. Second, the application of the great vivid reminder, the setting face to reality, while in the intermediate state. And third, the methods of closing the doors of the womb, while in the intermediate state when seeking rebirth. Page 18. Part 1. The Bardo of the Moments of Death. Instructions on the symptoms of death, or the first stage of the Chikhai Bardo. The primary clear light seen at the moment of death. The first, the setting face to face with the clear light during the intermediate state of the moments of death is. Here, some there may be who have listened much to religious instructions, yet not recognized, and some who, though recognizing, are nevertheless weak in familiarity. But all classes of individuals who have received the practical teachings called guides will, if this be applied to them, be set face to face with the fundamental clear light, and without any intermediate state, they will obtain the unborn Dharmakaya by the great perpendicular path. Footnote 1. Curiously, spiritual emancipation and even nirvana can be achieved instantaneously in Northern Buddhism via the great perpendicular path, without the need to enter the Bardo plane or suffer in the various worlds of samsaric existence. However, this is only possible for those who show great competence in yoga, much accumulated merit, or excellent karma. The manner of application is: it is best if the Guru, from whom the deceased received guiding instructions, can be had, but if the Guru cannot be obtained, then a brother of the faith, or if the latter is also unobtainable, then a learned man of the same faith, or should all these be unobtainable, then a person who can read correctly and distinctly ought to read this many times over. Thereby the deceased will be put in mind of what he had previously heard of the setting face to face, and will at once come to recognize that fundamental light and undoubtedly obtain liberation. As regards the time for the application of these instructions, when the expiration has ceased, the vital force will have sunk into the nerve center of wisdom. Footnote 2. The nerve center referred to is psychic rather than physical. That of wisdom is located in the heart. And the knower. Footnote 3. Knower refers to the mind in its fully conscious state. Will be experiencing the clear light of the natural condition. Footnote 4. The mind in its natural elemental state. When it is in its unnatural state, it resides inside the human body, and so is influenced by the five senses. Then, the vital force, being thrown backwards and flying downwards through the right and left nerves, the intermediate state momentarily dawns. The above directions should be applied before the vital force has rushed into the left nerve, after first having traversed the navel nerve center. The time ordinarily necessary for this motion of the vital force is as long as the inspiration is still present, or about the time required for eating a meal. Footnote 5. A unit of time used before clocks, which lasted between 20 minutes and half an hour. Then the manner of the application of the instruction is, when the breathing is about to cease, it is best if the transference has been applied efficiently. If the application has been inefficient, then address the deceased thus: O nobly born, so and so by name, the time has come now for thee to seek the path in reality. The breathing is about to cease. Thy Guru has set thee face to face before with the clear light, and now thou art about to experience it in its reality in the Bardo state, wherein all things are like the void and cloudless sky, and the naked, spotless intellect is like unto a transparent vacuum without circumference or center. At this moment know thou thyself, and abide in that state. I too, at this time, am setting thee face to face. Page 21. Having read this, repeat it many times in the ear of the person dying, even before the expiration has ceased, so as to impress it on the mind of the dying one. If the expiration is about to cease, turn the dying one over on the right side, which posture is called the lying posture of a lion. The throbbing of the arteries on the right and left side of the throat is to be pressed. If the person dying be disposed to sleep, or if the sleeping state advances, that should be arrested, and the arteries pressed gently but firmly. Footnote 6. Pressure is applied to the arteries so that the person can die fully awake and with a full awareness of their approaching death. Thereby, the vital force will not be able to return from the median nerve and will be sure to pass out through the Brahmanic aperture. Now the real setting face to face is to be applied. At this moment, the first glimpsing of the Bardo of the clear light of reality, which is the infallible mind of the Dharmakaya, is experienced by all sentient beings. The interval between the cessation of the expiration and the cessation of the inspiration is the time during which the vital force remaineth in the median nerve. The common people call this the state wherein the consciousness principle has fainted away. The duration of this state is uncertain. It dependeth upon the constitution, good or bad, and the state of the nerves and vital force. In those who have had even a little practical experience of the firm, tranquil state of dhyana, and in those who have sound nerves, this state continueth for a long time. Footnote 7. This can last as much as 7 days, although usually it is only 4 or 5. While the consciousness principle tends to leave the body at the moment of death, it nonetheless retains a delicate magnetic-like connection with the physical body until this state is over. In the setting face to face, the repetition of the above address to the deceased is to be persisted in until a yellowish liquid beginneth to appear from the various apertures of the bodily organs of the deceased. In those who have led an evil life, and in those of unsound nerves, the above state endures only so long as would take to snap a finger. Again, in some, it endures as long as the time taken for the eating of a meal. In various tantras, it is said that the state of swoon endures for about 3½ days. Most other religious treatises say for 4 days, and that this setting face to face with the clear light ought to be persevered in during the whole time. The manner of applying these directions is: if, when dying, one be by one's own self capable of diagnosing the symptoms of death, use of the knowledge should have been made ere this. If the dying person be unable to do so, then either the Guru or a Shishya or a brother in the faith with whom the one dying was very intimate should be kept at hand, who will vividly impress upon the one dying the symptoms of death as they appear in due order, repeatedly saying at this first thus: now the symptoms of earth sinking into water are come. Footnote 8. One of the 3 main symptoms of death. The other 2 are water sinking into fire and fire sinking into air. When all the symptoms of death are about to be completed, then enjoin upon the one dying this resolution, speaking in a low tone of voice in the ear: O nobly born, or, if it be a priest, O venerable sir, let not thy mind be distracted. If it be a brother in the faith, or some other person, then call him by name, and say thus: O nobly born, that which is called death, being come to thee now, resolve thus: O, this now is the hour of death. By taking advantage of this death, I will so act for the good of all sentient beings, peopling the illimitable expanse of the heavens, as to obtain the perfect Buddhahood by resolving on love and compassion towards them, and by directing my entire effort to the soul perfection. Shaping the thoughts thus, especially at this time when the Dharmakaya of clear light in the state after death can be realized for the benefit of all sentient beings. Know that thou art in that state, and resolve that thou wilt obtain the best boon of the state of the great symbol. Footnote 9. It is possible for the ultimate truth to be realized at this stage, but only if the deceased made good progress along the path before death. Otherwise, he must wander on, and, on down Bardo until rebirth. In which thou art as follows. Even if I cannot realize it, yet will I know this Bardo, and mastering the great body of union in Bardo, will appear in whatever shape will benefit all beings, whomsoever. I will serve all sentient beings, infinite in number, as are the limits of the sky. Keeping thyself unseparated from this resolution, thou shouldst try to remember whatever devotional practices thou wert accustomed to perform during thy lifetime. In saying this, the reader shall put his lips close to the ear, and shall repeat it distinctly, clearly, impressing it upon the dying person, so as to prevent his mind from wandering even for a moment. After the expiration has completely ceased, press the nerve of sleep firmly, and a lama or a person higher or more learned than thyself impress in these words thus. Page 23. Reverend Sir, now that thou art experiencing the fundamental clear light, try to abide in that state which now thou art experiencing. And also, in the case of any other person, the reader shall set him face to face thus. O nobly born, so and so, listen. Now thou art experiencing the radiance of the clear light of pure reality. Recognize it. O nobly born, thy present intellect, in real nature void, not formed into anything as regards characteristics or color, naturally void, is the very reality, the all good. Thine own intellect, which is now voidness, yet not to be regarded as of the voidness of nothingness, but as being the intellect itself, unobstructed, shining, thrilling, and blissful, is the very consciousness, the all-good Buddha. Thine own consciousness, not formed into anything, in reality void, and the intellect shining and blissful, these two are inseparable. The union of them is the Dharmakaya state of perfect enlightenment. Footnote 10. The purest and highest state of being, devoid of limitations. Thine own consciousness, shining, void, and inseparable from the great body of radiance, has no birth nor death, and is the immutable light, Buddha Amitabha. Footnote 11. The state of the boundless light. Knowing this is sufficient, recognizing the voidness of thine own intellect to be Buddhahood, and looking upon it as being thine own consciousness, is to keep thyself in the state of the divine mind of the Buddha. Repeat this distinctly and clearly 3 or even 7 times. That will recall to the mind of the dying one, the former, i.e., when living, setting face to face by the Guru. Secondly, it will cause the naked consciousness to be recognized as the clear light. And thirdly, recognizing one's own self, thus, one becomes permanently united with the Dharmakaya and liberation will be certain. Page 25. Thus, the primary clear light is recognized and liberation attained. But if it be feared that the primary clear light has not been recognized, then it can certainly be assumed there is dawning upon the deceased that called the secondary clear light, which dawned in somewhat more than a mealtime period after that the expiration has ceased. According to one's good or bad karma, the vital force floweth down into either the right or left nerve and goeth out through any of the apertures of the body. Then cometh a lucid condition of the mind. To say that the state of the primary clear light endures for a mealtime period would depend upon the good or bad condition of the nerves, and also whether there has been previous practice or not in the setting face to face. When the consciousness principle getteth outside the body, it saith to itself, "Am I dead, or am I not dead?" It cannot determine. It sees its relatives and connections as it had been used to seeing them before. It even heareth the wailings. The terrifying karmic illusions have not yet dawned, nor have the frightful apparitions or experiences caused by the lords of death yet come. During this interval, the directions are to be applied by the Lama or reader. There are those devotees of the perfected stage and of the visualizing stage. If it be one who was in the perfected stage, then call him thrice by name, and repeat over and over again the above instructions of setting face to face with the clear light. If it be one who was in the visualizing stage, then read out to him the introductory descriptions and the text of the meditation on this tutelary deity, and then say, "O thou of noble birth, meditate upon thine own tutelary deity." Footnote 12. Usually one of the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, of whom Chenrezig is the most popular. Here the deity's name is to be mentioned by the reader. Do not be distracted. Earnestly concentrate thy mind upon thy tutelary deity. Meditate upon him as if he were the reflection of the moon in water, apparent yet inexistent in itself. Meditate upon him as if he were a being with a physical body. So saying, the reader will impress it. If the deceased be of the common folk say, meditate upon the great compassionate Lord. By thus being set face to face, even those who would not be expected to recognize the Bardo unaided are undoubtedly certain to recognize it. Persons who, while living, had been set face to face with the reality by a guru, yet who have not made themselves familiar with it, will not be able to recognize the Bardo clearly by themselves. Either a guru or a brother in the faith will have to impress vividly such persons. There may even be those who have made themselves familiar with the teachings, yet who, because of the violence of the disease causing death, may be mentally unable to withstand illusions. For such also, this instruction is absolutely necessary. Again, there are those who, although previously familiar with the teachings, have become liable to pass into the miserable states of existence, owing to breach of vows or failure to perform essential obligations honestly. To them, this instruction is indispensable. If the first stage of the Bardo has been taken by the forelock, that is best. But if not, by application of this distinct recalling to the deceased, while in the second stage of the Bardo, his intellect is awakened and attaineth liberation. While on the second stage of the Bardo, one's body is of the nature of that called the shining illusory body. Not knowing whether he be dead or not, a state of lucidity cometh to the deceased. If the instructions be successfully applied to the deceased while he is in that state, then, by the meeting of the mother reality and the offspring reality, footnote 13. The mother reality is the primal or fundamental truth, which can be experienced only after death. The offspring reality, on the other hand, can be realized in this world through practicing deep meditation. Karma controls not. Like the sun's rays, for example, dispelling the darkness, the clear light on the path dispelled the power of karma. That which is called the second stage of the Bardo dawned upon the thought body. The knower hovers within those places to which its activities had been limited. If at this time this special teaching be applied efficiently, then the purpose will be fulfilled. For the karmic illusions will not have come yet, and therefore he, the deceased, cannot be turned hither and thither.
Explanation by Timothy Leary's book. First Bardo, the period of ego loss, or non-game ecstasy, Chikhai Bardo. Part 1. The primary clear light seen at the moment of ego loss. All individuals who have received the practical teachings of this manual will, if the text be remembered, be set face to face with the ecstatic radiance and will win illumination instantaneously without entering upon hallucinatory struggles and without further suffering on the age-long pathway of normal evolution which traverses the various worlds of game existence. This doctrine underlies the whole of the Tibetan model. Faith is the first step on the secret pathway. Then comes illumination, and with it certainty, and when the goal is won, emancipation. Success implies very unusual preparation in consciousness expansion, as well as much calm, compassionate game playing, good karma on the part of the participant. If the participant can be made to see and to grasp the idea of the empty mind as soon as the guide reveals it, that is to say, if he has the power to die consciously and at the supreme moment of quitting the ego, can recognize the ecstasy, which will dawn upon him then, and become one with it. All game bonds of illusion are broken asunder immediately. The dreamer is awakened into reality simultaneously with the mighty achievement of recognition. It is best if the guru, spiritual teacher from whom the participant received guiding instructions, is present, but if the guru cannot be present, then another experienced person, or if the latter is also unavailable, then a person whom the participant trusts should be available and read the manual without imposing any of his own games. Realization of the voidness, the unbecome, the unborn, the unmade, the unformed, implies Buddhahood, perfect enlightenment, the state of the divine mind of the Buddha. It may be helpful to remember that this ancient doctrine is not in conflict with modern physics. The theoretical physicist and cosmologist George Gamow presented in 1950 a viewpoint which is close to the phenomenological experience described by the Tibetan Lamas. If we imagine history running back in time, we inevitably come to the epoch of the Big Squeeze, with all the galaxies, stars, atoms, atomic nuclei squeezed, so to speak, to a pulp. During that early stage of evolution, matter must have been dissociated into its elementary components. We call this primordial mixture realm. At this first point in the evolution of the present cycle, according to this first-rank physicist, there existed only the unbecome, the unborn, the unformed. And this, according to astrophysicists, is the way it will end, the silent unity of the unformed. The Tibetan Buddhists suggest that the uncluttered intellect can experience what astrophysics confirms. The Buddha Vairocana, the Dhyani Buddha of the center, manifester of phenomena, is the highest path to enlightenment. As the source of all organic life, in him all things, visible and invisible, have their consummation and absorption. He is associated with the central realm of the densely packed, i.e., the seat of all universal forces, and things are densely packed together. This remarkable convergence of modern astrophysics and ancient Lamaism demands no complicated explanation. The cosmological awareness and awareness of every other natural process is there in the cortex. You can confirm this preconceptual mystical knowledge by empirical observation and measurement, but it's all there inside your skull. Your neurons know because they are linked directly to the process, are part of it. In those who have had even a little practical experience of the tranquil state of non-game awareness, and in those who have happy games, this state can last from 30 minutes to several hours. In this state, realization of what mystics call the ultimate truth is possible, provided that sufficient preparation has been made by the person beforehand. Otherwise, he cannot benefit now, and must wander on into lower and lower conditions of hallucinations, as determined by his past games, until he drops back to routine reality. It is important to remember that the consciousness expansion process is the reverse of the birth process, birth being the beginning of the game life, and the ego loss experience being a temporary ending of game life. But in both there is a passing from one state of consciousness into another, and just as an infant must wake up and learn from experience the nature of this world, so likewise a person at the moment of consciousness expansion must wake up in this new brilliant world and become familiar with its own peculiar condition. In those who are heavily dependent on their ego games, and who dread giving up their control, the illuminated state endures only so long as it would take to snap a finger. In some it lasts as long as the time taken for eating a meal. If the subject is prepared to diagnose the symptoms of ego loss, he needs no outside help at this point. Not only should the person about to give up this ego be able to diagnose the symptoms as they come, one by one, but he should also be able to recognize the clear light without being set face to face with it by another person. If the person fails to recognize and accept the onset of ego loss, he may complain of strange bodily symptoms. This shows that he has not reached a liberated state. Then the guide or friend should explain the symptoms as indicating the onset of ego loss. Here is a list of commonly reported physical sensations. 1. Bodily pressure, which the Tibetans call earth sinking into water. 2. Clammy coldness, followed by feverish heat, which the Tibetans call water sinking into fire. 3. Body disintegrating or blown to atoms, called fire sinking into air. 4. Pressure on head and ears, which Americans call rocket launching into space. 5. Tingling in extremities. 6. Feelings of body melting or flowing as if wax. 7. Nausea. 8. Trembling or shaking, beginning in pelvic regions and spreading up to torso. These physical reactions should be recognized as signs heralding transcendence. Avoid treating them as symptoms of illness. Accept them. Merge with them. Enjoy them. Ha. Do not fear. That's what I was told during the hero dose. Mild nausea occurs often with the ingestion of morning glory seeds, or peyote, rarely with mescaline and infrequently with LSD or psilocybin, and Amanita muscaria. If the subject experiences stomach messages, they should be hailed as a sign that consciousness is moving around in the body. The symptoms are mental. The mind controls the sensation, and the subject should merge with the sensation, experience it fully, enjoy it. And having enjoyed it, let consciousness flow onto the next phase. It is usually more natural to let consciousness stay in the body. The subject's attention can move from the stomach and concentrate on breathing, heartbeat. If this does not free him from nausea, the guide should move the consciousness to external events, music, walking in the garden, etc. The appearance of physical symptoms of ego loss, recognized and understood, should result in peaceful attainment of illumination. If ecstatic acceptance does not occur, or when the period of peaceful silence seems to be ending, the relevant sections of the instruction can be spoken in a low tone of voice in the ear. It is often useful to repeat them distinctly, clearly impressing them upon the person so as to prevent his mind from wandering. Another method of guiding the experience with a minimum of activity is to have the instructions previously recorded in the subject's own voice and to flip the tape on at the appropriate moment. The reading will recall to the mind of the voyager the former preparation. It will cause the naked consciousness to be recognized as the clear light of the beginning. It will remind the subject of his unity with the state of perfect enlightenment and help him maintain it. If, when undergoing ego loss, one is familiar with the state by virtue of previous experience and preparation, the wheel of rebirth, all game playing, is stopped, and liberation instantaneously is achieved. But such spiritual efficiency is so very rare that the normal mental condition of the person is unequal to the supreme feat of holding on to the state in which the clear light shines, and there follows a progressive descent into lower and lower states of the Bardo existence, and then rebirth. The simile of a needle balanced and set rolling on a thread is used by the lamas to elucidate this condition. So long as the needle retains its balance, it remains on the thread. Eventually, however, the law of gravitation, the pull of the ego, or external stimulation, affects it and it falls. In the realm of the clear light, similarly, the mentality of a person in the ego-transcendent state momentarily enjoys a condition of balance, of perfect equilibrium, and of oneness, unfamiliar with such a state, which is an ecstatic state of non-ego. It is so beautiful. The consciousness of the average human being lacks the power to function in it. This is what I have been longing for so many times. This state. And I have experienced it twice, but just for a short while. Karmic, i.e. game, propensities becloud the consciousness principle with thoughts of personality, of individualized being, of dualism. Thus, losing equilibrium, consciousness falls away from the clear light. It is thought process which prevent the realization of nirvana, which is the blowing out of the flame of selfish game desire, and so the wheel of life continues to turn. All or some of the appropriate passages in the instructions may be read to the voyager during the period of waiting for the drug to take effect, and when the first symptoms of ego loss appear. When the voyager is clearly in a profound ego-transcendent ecstasy, the wise guide will remain silent. Part 2. The secondary clear light seen immediately after ego loss. I'm not reading the whole thing. Another typical and most rewarding phase of the first Bardo involves ecstatic energy movement felt in the spine, the base of the backbone seems to be melting or seems on fire. If the person can maintain quiet concentration, the energy will be sensed as flowing upwards. Tantric adepts devote decades of concentrated meditation to the release of these ecstatic energies, which they call Kundalini, the serpent power. One allows the energies to travel upwards through several ganglionic centers, chakras, to the brain, where they are sensed as a burning sensation in the top of the cranium. These sensations are not unpleasant to the prepared person, but on the contrary are accompanied by the most intense feelings of joy and illumination. Ill-prepared subjects may interpret the experience in pathological terms and attempt to control it, usually with unpleasant results. If the subject fails to recognize the rushing flow of first Bardo, liberation from the ego is lost. The person finds himself slipping back into mental activities. At this point, he should try to recall the instructions or be reminded of them, and the second contact with these processes can be made. The second stage is less intense. A ball set bouncing reaches its greatest height at the first bounce. The second bounce is lower, and each succeeding bounce is still lower until the ball becomes still. The consciousness at the loss of the ego is similar to this. Its first spiritual bound directly upon leaving the body ego is the highest, the next is lower. Then the force of karma takes over, and different forms of external reality are experienced. Finally, the force of karma having spent itself, consciousness returns to normal. Routines are taken up again, and thus rebirth occurs. The first ecstasy usually ends with a momentary flashback to the ego condition. This return can be happy or sad, loving or suspicious, fearful or courageous, depending on the personality, the preparation, and the setting. After you have experienced these two states, you may wish to pursue this distinction intellectually. We are confronted here with one of the oldest debates in Eastern philosophy. Is it better to be part of the sugar or to taste the sugar? Theological controversies and their dualities are far removed from experience. You may be lucky enough to know what the academic monks could only think about. Here ends the first Bardo, the period of ego loss, or non-game ecstasy.